So, November already, which means it's time for an October wrap up. I can't quite believe that we are in the tail end of the year, but just let's move beyond that. So the first 5 books that I'm going to mention I'm not going to talk about in detail because they are the Christina Lauren books that I read for my author trial video, which was earlier in the month, so I will link that up above for you if you want more detail. First we have Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating. Josh is friends with Hazel and they start setting each other up on blind double dates, and as you can imagine, they end up falling in love with each other instead. Then there's Roomies, in which Holland discovers a busker that she has a bit of a thing for, but when she tries to get him a job in her uncle's musical, it turns out that he doesn't actually have legal right to live in the US, and so she decides to marry him so that he can stay. Autobiography is the only YA option on this romance book list, and as the name would suggest, it is also a queer romance. It follows Tanner, who is out and bisexual, but he has to go back into the closet when he moves to an all-Mormon town, and then he falls in love with a Mormon boy, and that causes some difficulty, as I'm sure you can imagine. My favourite half-night stand is another friends to lovers trope. Millie and Reed end up having sex one night after they've been hanging out with their friends, and then the friends all concoct a plan to try internet dating together because they need dates for a work event that they have coming up, and it starts out as a joke, but Millie creates a secret profile and ends up matching with Reed, and it gets a little overdramatic, as I suspect you could figure out from that synopsis. And The Unhoneymooners is a hate-to-love romance between Olive and Ethan. Olive's sister was marrying Ethan's brother, and because of a very sad turn of events, the bride and groom are not able to go on their honeymoon, and so Olive and Ethan go instead, but they have to pretend to be the married couple. And this one is incredibly cute. I think this one and Josh and Hazel's Guide to Not Dating are my 2 favourites. I did also really enjoy Roomies, and my favourite half-night stand and autobiography were my least favourites, but I did still enjoy them. Moving on to my rereads for the month of October, I started off with The Novice by Trudy Canavan, which is book 2 in the Black Magician trilogy. And like I said, this is a reread for me, and I hadn't reread this book for probably 7 or 8 years, and it didn't quite live up to the hype in my head. It did suffer a little bit from middle book syndrome. It is the second book in a trilogy, so it's very much sort of that quintessential middle book that doesn't have a whole lot going on. There is a little bit of character development, but mostly it is just filler. I still really enjoyed it, but more from a nostalgic point of view rather than from it being the best book in the trilogy, because I don't think that it is, but I am still really looking forward to picking up the 3rd one. Then, in readiness for the release of The Toll by Neil Shusterman, I reread Scythe and Thunderhead, which are books 1 and 2 in the Arc of the Scythe trilogy, and I actually, just as I'm filming this, started The Toll today. I hadn't finished my last book, but I managed to get an early copy because the Waterstones near my work had some copies out a week early, so I couldn't resist picking it up, and I need to cancel my pre-order. I just had to pick it up because I reread these fully in the knowledge that they'd get me hyped even more to read The Toll, and this one ends on a cliffhanger, so yeah, I loved these the second time through. The shock moments didn't shock me quite as much because I knew that they were coming, but I still felt really there with the characters in terms of the emotions that they were feeling, and I just really enjoy this trilogy, and I'm super excited to be reading the final instalment. Then on to the other books that I read for the first time this month. First up we have Nocturna by Maya Motain, which is a young adult fantasy novel that follows 2 characters. One is a prince whose brother has gone missing and everybody has accepted that he's dead, but our main character does not accept that and is continuing the search for his brother. Our other character is a thief, and they cross paths, as you might imagine, and a great evil is unleashed and they have to work together to get rid of said evil. This book is incredibly similar to the Shades of Magic series by V.E. Schwab. So if you like that series, I definitely think that you will enjoy this one. I personally didn't love it, but that's not surprising because I didn't particularly love the Shades of Magic trilogy either. This had pretty good pacing and the characters were interesting and there was some character development. I believe it's going to be a trilogy. I know that it's not a standalone anyway. I'm not sure if it's going to be a duology or a trilogy. I think a trilogy, but don't quote me on that. But I enjoyed it okay, didn't love it. I do have a reading vlog where this is the only book that I read in that vlog, so I will link that for you if you want some more of my immediate thoughts from while I was reading it and just as I finished it. I also read Tunnel of Bones by Victoria Schwab, which is book 2 in the Cassidy Blake series, which is her middle grade series about a girl who can see and speak to ghosts and can cross over to the Vale, which is kind of like the in-between place between life and death. And I don't want to tell you too much about what the plot of this one is because it's a sequel, but it was just as whimsical and fun and a little bit spooky, but nothing major. If I can handle it, trust me, you can. And I just really enjoyed it. I've said before and I'll say again, this series really reminds me of the Mediator books by Meg Cabot that I read when I was just before I was a teenager, and I absolutely loved those, and these really remind me of that series. So it's almost nostalgic in a weird sort of way, even though I've not read these books before because they're so similar to those. It feels like revisiting my childhood in a way, and I really enjoy them. It's a super easy reading style. They're quite short books, so they're easy to get through quite quickly, and yeah, not much more to say about it really. I really enjoyed this one. I also read Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahurin, which is also young adult fantasy, and this one follows a witch who has to marry a witch hunter in an arranged marriage, but he doesn't know that she's a witch and she has to keep that a secret. And then there's all sorts of other things going on, so I'm not going to tell you about those because spoilers, but the setting of this is reminiscent of 17th century France, so it's quite a different sort of setting to a lot of the fantasy books that I read, so I really enjoyed that. One aspect that I didn't like was the use of French just in random places throughout the book. I mentioned that in my vlog where I read this. I just wasn't a huge fan of that, but otherwise the writing style was really easy to follow and the pacing was pretty consistently fast throughout, which I personally enjoy. And there's a little bit of will they won't they between the two main characters. It is dual perspective, so you do get some time told from the perspective of Lou and some time told from the perspective of Reed, but this is the first book in a duology. We get a little bit of a glimpse of the magic system in this one, but I feel like book 2 is going to dive much further into the magic system, so I'm really looking forward to that, and I did enjoy this one. And then finally I read The Raven Tower by Anne Leckie, which is either adult or young adult fantasy. I think it could sit quite comfortably in either of those categories, but this is a bit of a weird one. So it's told from the perspective of a god at various points in time, and one of those points in time the god is narrating what they saw a character do as if they were talking to that character. So the very first line of the book reads, "I first saw you when you rode out of the forest, past the cluster of tall, bulge-eyed offering stakes that mark the edges of the forest, your horse at a walk." So in second person, which is very different. I've read one other book that was in second person, or part of it was in second person, which was the 5th season by N.K. Jemisin, but N.K. Jemisin did it very, very differently than Ann Leckie. So if I find... So chapter 1 after the prologue, you are she is you are Soon. Remember, the woman whose son is dead. It's not a spoiler, that's chapter 1. So in the 5th season, the second person perspective was used almost as if you could imagine that you was just the character's name, whereas this, it was quite clear that you were being told what somebody observed you to do, which is very different and was quite jarring at first until I started to get into it, which happened probably around 50 or so pages into the book. So it does take a little bit of getting used to. In terms of what actually happens in the story, I don't want to tell you anything because I feel like the enjoyment of this one comes out of the discovering what's happening as you're going along. Word of warning though, it doesn't have the most conclusive or satisfactory ending in the world. So if you're not a fan of open endings, I don't think this is necessarily an open ending, but it's not as closed as I would perhaps prefer. It didn't bother me so much, but just be aware of that if you decide you want to pick this one up. But if the premise sounds interesting to you, then I say give it a go, because it is very, very different. And that's it. Those are all the books that I read in the month of October. I'm actually really excited for the reading in November. I feel like I've got some really fun things to pick up and I'm really looking forward to it. If there's anything that you read in October that you really, really loved, let me know. But that's it for this one. Thank you so much for watching. If you like this video and want to see more like this from me, then do think about hitting that subscribe button, and I hope to see you here again soon. Thanks! Bye!